Okay, so this right here, this is the best looking corn I've ever grown. It's silage corn. Like I said in the other video, we accidentally bought silage seed corn this year instead of field corn. But as you can tell, it turned out. I mean, look at how tall this stuff is. My standing reach is probably like around 8 foot. This stuff's got to be close to 12 feet tall. And these outside rows here, they got some really nice sized ears. And you can tell, look how thick this stuff is planted. It ran through our planter a little bit thicker than it should have been because we double planted most of this field, and these silage corn kernels were a little smaller than the field corn kernels we've had in the past, so it kind of put it in pretty thick. At home in our backyard, we actually had the silage corn tip over in a windstorm, in a big storm, but this ground wasn't saturated as much and it didn't get tipped over in that storm, so it's all standing. We've got about a ½ acre of it right here. This stuff has got to be yielding at least 200 bushels to the acre. And turn around, you can see over there, that's recycled field corn. That's corn that I'd harvested, I've hand-picked in the spring off of a little bit of leftover stuff 2 years ago, and you can see how thin that is. We'll go over there and then we'll go in here. We'll go to the thin stuff first. You can see there's a lot of weeds in here. It was so open, I put it in a few brassicas like in early July, and you can definitely tell a lot of this got picked out by the cranes and some of it didn't even come up, but we still have some good corn in here. But yeah, way too much sunlight getting in. I mean, in a cornfield there should not be this big of gaps from here to here all the way to those plants, and you can see the brassicas in here are filling in the gaps pretty nicely. But overall, this little bit, you know, it did produce pretty good for recycled corn. I mean, we got really good sized ears on here. I mean, with a low planting population like this, usually you end up with really good sized ears. And this is the first year we had anything here. This was a little triangle spot we just plowed up this spring. Normally, in the past, it's just been grass. I didn't even fertilize this, and I mean, this plant right here, it's got 2 pretty good sized ears on it. So I'm happy with how it turned out. We'll go over to the thick stuff next. So the stuff here on the edge looks the best. The edge rows always get the most sun. Almost every single one of these plants, really nice ear, but when you get in there, they're a little bit smaller. Okay, I'm in here now. Look at the difference. I'm squatting down so I can see more, but look at how dark it is in here, and it's so cool. Like, you can't feel the sun in here at all. This is not a single weed in this whole field. This ground is pretty moist ground, but it's been so dry this year, it's starting to like crack up. You can actually, I can like stick my whole hand under the ground here in this big, that's weird, but anyways, even in the couple rows in, this corn is pretty good sized ears. And you can see how high up this stuff is. It's going to be hard for these deer to get at some of this corn, because right here's an ear above my head. Look at how thick this is. I mean, it definitely is too thick. You can see this has all been double planted. There's actually like 3 rows right here, but even where it's super thick, it's still produced. I mean, these ears are a little smaller than what there was on the edge, but if you get to a little wider row like this, the ears are a little bigger. And like I said, this is silage corn, so that's why it's so tall. That's why the ears are so high up on the plant. I'll take you over on the other side. Just on the other side of the silage corn, we got some more field corn and then some soybeans. All right, here we are. You can see the difference already. So in this really thin stuff here, with as much sunlight as what these plants are getting, a lot of these plants, you can see, actually have 2 ears on them. Whereas if it was planted thicker, each plant would only have 1. You can see this one's got 2. This one's got 2. This one's got 2. They pretty much all have 2 in here because it's planted way thinner than it should be, but in reality, if each plant has 2, that's just basically it made up for the thin amount of corn, but it could have definitely been planted thicker to get a higher yield. Turn around, you'll see that really thick stuff. There's a complete difference in the planting population. It's like weed free and just a lot darker in there, and that's probably a super high yield. So just wanted to point that out on here.
Okay.
Like as thick as what this stuff is planted, like I have no idea what the planting population is, but it's got to be close to like 40 to 50,000 or higher, probably 60,000 honestly. And that's probably like a little bit above average ear. Here's one that's a little smaller, but honestly, for as thick as what this is a pretty wide row. This is probably like a 30-inch row I'm standing in right here. And you can see like right here, there's like 3 really tight rows. And these plants in here have a little bit smaller ears. See that? That's a plant that's in a pretty tight row. I mean, it's still produced, but obviously not as good as these two. So, like that row didn't really need to be there, but it is just amazing how thick this stuff is, you know. So this right here is that long narrow strip. We were just right down there by that's that thick corn, the brush piles right there. Right on the other side of these soybeans is a little bit of pumpkins. I think I had a video of this, but I didn't have much footage. But this is the best soybeans on the whole property this year. And they're about waist high. I'll get in there, you'll see. All right, so as you can tell, these are no joke waist high beans. Oh, there's some turkeys right there. See that? They just ran through.
I didn't see them.
Right there, right there. Huh. Anyways, you can keep that in the same clip. As you can tell, these are waist high beans. I pulled one out. It would have been like maybe 2 weeks ago. I counted like 90 pods on one plant in here. These are the beans that were planted a little bit thin. One of the planters, our 2-row planter, one of the sides plugged up, and this was only planted with one. So basically every other row wasn't planted. So I came back in here and broadcasted a whole bunch and then dragged them all in. So it turned out fine. These are probably the lowest population planted beans on our property this year. All the other fields are a little bit thicker and they didn't get quite as tall as this field. So maybe I'll plant probably a little bit thinner population on the soybeans in the future. I'll pluck a plant out here and count it. Just a random one. I counted 71 pods on this one plant. You can see it's branching out more. If it was planted at a higher population, it would look more like this. It wouldn't have all these extra branches. So I'll probably plant a little bit lower population. You'll see in the next field coming up, those beans are a little bit shorter and it was planted at a higher population. At the house, in the other video, those beans had about 50 pods per plant. This one's got 70. And like I said, I counted 90 on one of the bigger ones 2 weeks ago out of the same field. So these are probably the best beans I've grown anywhere this year, right next to the best looking corn. So. Okay, so we're at the Field of Dreams here. This is a 1.2 acre food plot. This year it's primarily soybeans, even though it looks like all corn. This corn right here, I planted like an L of corn in front of the deer blind, and then in the middle of the field, splitting up, there's a section of beans on the other side of this corn we'll take you to, and you can see those beans right over there. That side was all corn last year, so I rotated it into beans, and this corn is mainly just to split up the field in half to not make it seem so big. And you can see this really short corn here. This was planted really late because, like I said in the other spot, the cranes, that's silage corn right there, that tall stuff, as well as this. This is all recycled field corn. The cranes completely pulled out all the original planted field corn in this field because I planted a few rows of silage corn just to try it out, and then generic field corn, and they pulled out all the field corn. So I had to come back in here maybe like a couple weeks after, and I just worked it all up with the disc and just hand broadcasted all this really short stuff, and it's planted pretty thick, and you'll see how thick as thick as what it is, it's still producing ears. That's pretty small though. I actually mixed in some soybeans in here too when I hand broadcasted all this corn. You can see how thick is what this stuff is. Right here's a cob. Pretty decent size for how thick is what this stuff is. And here's the original planting. You can see how thin it is. This is an area I left. You can see the really thick stuff to the left there. That's the silage corn again. And this really thin stuff is where the original planted field corn was. This is just some of the stuff that looked a little better that I didn't want to get rid of. You can see how thin what this stuff is. And that's the area that I replanted. And it got really thick. But it's still producing pretty good. You can see it's a little bit behind. Some of those ears are just starting to, you know. But we'll take you over to the other side where the beans look, right over here. These beans over here didn't grow as good as last year. And for some reason, I just had a heck of a time trying to kill the weeds off this year. A lot more weeds in here than what there was last year, and a lot of this field is about knee to thigh high, where last year it was all waist high, hardly a weed in the field. I don't know why. I still fertilized it pretty good this year. You can tell these beans are turning pretty fast. Okay, as you can tell, these beans are noticeably shorter than the other field. The other field was all up to here. I'll pluck a plant off, just a random one. And you can see these are definitely planted at a higher population. You see how there's no branching? These plants were like right next to each other, so you can probably count this as one plant, but I'm just going to count one. Alright, I got 31 pods on this plant, but with the higher population of plants out here, it should probably yield about the same. I still think the other field might be a little bit higher, but without actually harvesting this stuff, you're never really going to know what this yields. I know the average for Wisconsin is around like 60 bushel beans, so I'm sure I'm getting at least 50 bushels to the acre here out of these beans. They look just as good as a lot of the farmers' beans around, so like I said, they were definitely better last year, but still a lot of food for the deer. On the other side of this field where the beans, they look just as good. They're about the same height too, so we'll take you to the next big field after this. And at the end of this video, stick around. There'll be a really cool drone video with all the plots and just a really cool layout. You'll be able to see everything from the air. You can see the beans all on that side of the field. The corn here is just to split up that half from that half. And I wanted beans on this side at least one more year here before I alternate it into corn, because out of our deer blind there, you can see I got good screening with the corn in front of the blind. And that's the blind that my dad actually shot that 5.5-year-old buck out of last November during gun season, in the middle of the week too. He came out right there in the corner and dropped him right there. It's the first year we've ever shot out of that blind. You can see these beans are pretty short right here, but it's pretty shaded, so that's why they're really short here on the edge. We'll take you over to the next field next. That's kind of that way, about 100 to 150 yards. All right, so right behind me here, you can see the 1-acre soybean field that was planted right around June 10th. It was super dry when we planted. That's why that field's completely green yet. There ain't any yellow in that field, but you'll see that they produce pretty good. And then to the right of me here, this is the approximately 1.5-acre cornfield. Our biggest food plot. This is the first year we've ever planted the whole thing. It's pretty wet ground here. This is pretty weedy here in the front, but once you get in there, I got a strip of silage corn about maybe 20 yards long, 20 yards wide in the middle, and then each side of that is recycled field corn. It's a little bit thinner, so there's a lot of weeds in there. See, these beans are just as tall as those other beans we just saw, and they were planted almost a month behind. I'll pluck a plant off here. They're pretty thick too. As you can tell, they're pretty thick, but usually on late planted soybeans you want to plant thicker than thinner, because these beans, they're still trying to put on brand new pods at the top here, and they're probably the frost is probably gonna stay green almost up until the first frost because they were planted so late.
Okay.
I got 29 pods on this plant, and we had 31 in the other field, and like I said, the other field was planted almost a month earlier, and I don't know why that field didn't grow as good this year, but being planted later like this, I had better weed control. As you can tell, there's hardly a weed in this whole soybean field. And this is the first year we've had this into a food plot as well. This has usually been a hay field from the farmer, and we just acquired this field because we wanted to plant a few more acres. And this is also, turn around, this is the first year we've had this entire, I call this the swamp plot field because it's pretty wet ground. These soybeans, that field's a little higher. This we'll be able to plow in the future. That we're just gonna have to disc up and work in because it's too wet to plow. There was actually some cattails growing in on the far side 2 years ago on a wet year where I had my brassicas. That's how wet this stuff is. But as dry as what it's been this year, it just did amazing. It might not do as good as what it did this year on a wetter year, but we'll take you in and show you the corn. It looks pretty good. Got a ton of water hemp in here. That's this really nasty weed. And again, you can see the silage corn, that really tall stuff right there. That's my like 20 or 30 yard strip of silage corn. The rest of this shorter stuff is all recycled field corn. But even as weedy as what it is, I mean, this plant's got 2 ears on it. This one's got one nice one. It's still produced really good for being as weedy as what it is. I mean, look at all these ears. And obviously thinner than it should be too. You can see there's a lot of gaps in here. That's why there's all this sunlight getting in. But by this field corn, just insanely thick. Hard to walk through, that's how thick it is. Definitely too thick. These plants right here are starting to fold over, but it's all got ears on it, just a little bit smaller than that field corn out there. And that field corn's got a lot more sunlight, a lot more room to grow. And as thick as what this stuff is planted, it did pretty good considering, you know, this ear's over my head right here. Okay. So right in the middle of this silage corn here, this stuff is a little bit shorter than that first spot we were at, and these ears are a little smaller. Like I said, this is about a 1.5 acre field. I put only about 4 bags of fertilizer on here. I knew it was a little bit light, whereas that first field where that silage corn looked really good, I put 3 bags, and that was a 1/2 acre. Maybe I put 4 on that one too, I don't remember. I know I definitely wanted to fertilize that one good, because I didn't know how well this was going to turn out. As wet as ground this is what this is. This is a little wetter than that first field, but that first field's pretty wet too. But it's a little bit under fertilized. That's why a lot of this stuff's a little bit small. But you gotta take into note, it is planted just as thick as the other field too. So it's definitely planted thicker than what it should have been. But yeah, really good weed control in this silage corn where there's no sunlight hitting the ground. But out there in that field corn area, there's like 6 foot tall weeds. They're almost as tall as the corn. Just terrible, but it's still produced at least. Okay. So we're in the silage corn here. Really dark, really good weed control. Coming out this way is the recycled field corn area. Look at that, you can just see the sky. Just a lot more weeds in here. I actually have some brassicas in here that I seeded in because it was so open. But this area ain't too bad for weeds. The other side had, like I said, almost 6 foot high weeds. This corn is plenty tall, but there's a lot of gaps in here. It didn't run through the planter as good, and the cranes definitely pulled out some too. I had to come out here. I broadcasted like almost 200 pounds of shelled corn so the cranes and turkeys could eat that versus eating the stuff that's growing. I did that right when the corn was really small, when it was first poking through the ground. But they still got some. You can see right here, here's an area of weeds that I'm talking about. Right back there looked good, but for some reason, this is all just straight horse nettle. If you were to walk through here with shorts, you'd get stung like crazy. Look at that. 6 foot tall horse nettle in here. This is a really wide row. I think I missed this spot. This is like a 60-inch row. But going this way, I mean, look at that. But as thick as bad as what these weeds are in here, this corn still looks pretty darn good. It's definitely thinner than it should be. This plant right here has got 2 ginormous ears on it. And then a thicker area like this, still a lot of weeds. So I got to figure out a way that I can plant this recycled corn a little thicker, because I like to recycle the corn. There's going to be a lot of corn out here probably to pick in the spring. That way I can just have free corn to plant. I don't have to buy a 200 bag of seed or something. But I might just have to broadcast some corn, work it in, and then plant it with the planter to get it a little bit thicker, because it seems like it grows pretty good when it's thick, but you still might get some root lodging like I had at home. But in these really thin areas, I mean, I'm definitely having a yield loss. If I had a few more plants per acre in here, I'd have a higher yield probably, and way better weed control, because I'd have canopy closure and there just wouldn't be as much sunlight getting in here. Out here on the edge, I have a little strip of beans. The deer are all going to be coming from this direction. Right up there you can see my no-till brassica plot. That'll be coming out in a later video too.